I should have known something was wrong when they offered me double pay for a single night shift. The ranger station at Pendle Forest had been abandoned for 3 years. No explanation, no incident reports, just emptied out one October morning, and nobody ever went back. The Forestry Commission listed it as under review, but locals called it cursed. When my supervisor rang me at PM, asking if I'd cover an emergency shift there alone, I should have said no. But I was 2 months behind on rent, and £500 for 8 hours sounded like salvation. I pulled up to the cabin at midnight. My headlights swept across the wooden structure, and I felt my stomach drop. Someone had scratched something into the door. As I got closer, I could make out the words, "Count the trees." "Probably just kids," I muttered, though my voice shook. The inside was worse than I'd imagined. Everything was still there. Half-drunk coffee cups on the desk, a jacket hanging on the wall, a logbook open to October 15, 2021. It looked like whoever worked here had simply vanished mid-shift. The coffee in the cups had long since evaporated, leaving dark rings at the bottom. I touched the jacket. It was stiff with cold and damp. A smell hung in the air like wet bark and something metallic. The radio crackled to life, making me jump. "Station 7, this is base. You copy?" I grabbed the receiver. "Yeah, I'm here. What exactly am I supposed to be doing?" "Just monitor the radio. There've been reports of illegal logging in Sector 9. Call it in if you hear anything, and stay inside the cabin." Why would I? The line went dead. I sat at the desk and pulled out my phone. No signal, of course. I opened the logbook to distract myself. The entries were routine until the last few days. October 13th. Heard voices past the tree line. No one there when I checked. October 14th. The trees are closer. I know that sounds insane, but I measured. The nearest oak is 3 feet closer than yesterday. October 15th. The final entry was just one sentence repeated over and over. "Don't let them see you counting." My hands trembled as I closed the book. Outside, the wind picked up, making the cabin creak. I tried to focus on my phone, scrolling through downloaded videos with no sound, when I heard it. Footsteps on the roof, slow, deliberate, moving from one end of the cabin to the other. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped directly above my head. Then I heard breathing deep, rattling breaths that couldn't be human. Too slow, too deliberate. The radio crackled again. "Did you count them yet?" I grabbed the receiver. "Who is this? This isn't base. You need to count the trees before they count you." The voice was wrong, like multiple people speaking in unison, just slightly out of sync. I dropped the receiver and ran to the window. The forest was pitch black, except for my car's headlights, which I'd left on. But something was moving between the trees. Figures, tall and impossibly thin, weaving between the trunks. I counted 7, then 9, then 12. They were multiplying. I locked the door and pushed the desk against it. The footsteps on the roof started again, faster now, joined by scratching sounds, like branches dragging across the shingles. But there were no trees close enough to touch the roof. "Let me in." The voice came from outside the door. It sounded like my supervisor. "I forgot my keys. Let me in." I looked through the small window in the door. My supervisor stood there in his ranger uniform, smiling. But his smile was too wide, and his eyes were black, completely black. "Let me in," he repeated. "We need to count the trees." Behind him, the figures from the forest had emerged into the clearing. They stood at the edge of the light, and now could see them clearly. They weren't people. They were made of wood, twisted branches and bark, formed into the rough shape of humans. Their faces were knots and hollows, and they tilted their heads in perfect unison as they watched me. The thing wearing my supervisor's face pressed against the door. "The count is wrong. It's always wrong. That's why we need you." I backed away from the door and grabbed the logbook again, flipping through it desperately. There had to be something. The previous ranger had written in the margins, small notes I'd missed before. "They replace one tree each night. They take the shape of what you fear. If the count reaches 13, the cabin disappears." I looked out the window again and started counting the wooden figures. 12, still 12. Then I saw it standing at the very edge of the clearing, partially hidden in shadow, a 13th figure. But this one was different. It wore a ranger uniform, the same uniform hanging on the wall behind me. It raised its wooden hand and pointed at me. The cabin lights flickered, the radio exploded with static, and that unified voice, 13. Everything went dark. When the lights came back on, the door was open. The desk I'd pushed against it was back in its original position. The jacket was gone from the wall, and sitting on the desk was a fresh cup of coffee, still steaming. I ran outside to my car. The figures were gone, but as I fumbled with my keys, I glanced at the cabin one more time. There was a new scratch on the door, below the original message. "We counted you." I drove away, not stopping until I reached the main road. The next morning, I called my supervisor to quit. A woman answered his phone. "I'm sorry," she said, crying. "Mark died 3 days ago. Car accident on his way home from work." I felt ice in my veins. "That's impossible. He called me last night. He asked me to cover a shift. There is no shift. That station's been closed for years." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He was obsessed with it before he died. Kept saying he needed to go back and fix the count. I thought he was having a breakdown." I hung up and checked my bank account. The £500 had been deposited, but the reference note made my blood run cold. Payment for Station 7, October 15, 2021. That was 3 years ago. The date of the last logbook entry. I tried to forget, moved to a new flat in Manchester, changed my number, deleted everything connected to that night. But the dream started within a week. Always the same, standing in the forest, counting figures made of wood. Every time I reached 12, I'd see the 13th one wearing my own face. Last week, I drove past Pendle Forest. I told myself I wouldn't look, but I did. The cabin was gone. In its place stood a single oak tree that hadn't been there before. Carved into the trunk was a number, 14. I don't sleep well anymore, because sometimes, late at night, I hear footsteps on my roof, and when I look out my window, I see figures standing in my garden, tall, thin, made of wood. They're waiting for me to complete the count, and I think I'm almost ready to go back, because the truth is worse than the fear. 3 nights ago, I woke to find mud on my bedroom floor, footprints leading from my bed to the window. My footprints. Yesterday, my neighbor asked why. I was standing in my garden at AM. I wasn't. I was asleep. But when I checked my phone, there were photos I didn't take, pictures of trees, taken from my garden, all at different angles. Someone was counting them. This morning, I found a logbook on my kitchen table, brand new, but my name was already written inside. The first entry was in my handwriting. "The trees are closer." I measured. I didn't write that. Tonight, I heard the radio crackle in my empty flat. No radio exists here. Did you count them yet? I know what's happening. They didn't just count me that night. They replaced me. Somewhere in Pendle Forest, there's a wooden figure that looks exactly like me, and the real me is slowly becoming part of their count. The worst part? I can feel bark growing under my fingernails, and I can't stop counting the trees outside my window.